Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me, and thank you for that introduction, Greg. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional territory of the Lheidli T'enneh, and really thank the forum for allowing me to moderate this panel and unlocking the potential within Indigenous communities. I think there's a lot packed into that title, and I actually went up and looked up what potential meant, and the meaning says having or showing the capacity to become or develop into something in the future. So there's a lot that I think can be done here with the potential of Indigenous communities. I think that we all try to strive for potential within our own lives, whether it's individually, whether it's health, or with our families, so it's quite fitting. And a lot of it has talked about reconciliation, so I think that there's a lot that can be talked about here, and look forward to talking with our panel experts. So I'm going to introduce the panel, starting from my left and my left. So a little bit nervous, but anyway. First of all, we have Roberta Jamieson. She's the president and CEO of Indspire. She's also the executive producer. And Roberta Jamieson is a Mohawk woman from Ontario. Under Roberta's leadership, Indspire has flourished, raising funds for government from corporate and private sectors, providing annual distribution or disbursements and bursaries and scholarships to support Indigenous students. Second, we have Jennifer Botica. She's the principal for Kleanza Archaeology and is the director of communications and outreach. Jenny has experience in completing large-scale and small-scale archaeological assessments for the transportation and resource industry. She also has planned and managed large-scale projects for Indigenous groups within Jordan, Belize, Canada, and the United States. Next, we have JP. JP is the president and CEO of the Canadian Council of Aboriginal Business. JP is currently the president and works in Thunder Bay and is Anishinaabe. JP brings the past and the present forward to the table, moving non-Aboriginal and Aboriginal businesses to work together for partnership and shared economic prosperity. And lastly, we have Kory Wilson, the Executive Director for Aboriginal Initiatives Partnership for BCIT. Kory is the Chair of the National Indigenous Education Committee of Colleges and Institutions of Canada. With over 20 years of experience in post-secondary education, community development, and legal profession, Kory's passion lies with ensuring the success of Aboriginal learners and multi-barriered learners. So please welcome my panel. Roberta has to leave early, so she'll be leaving prior to the questions probably, so it's not a political statement. Roberta, please come up.
And she's short. Sego in my language, and Nyawagoa, thank you very much to the traditional people, the Lheidli T'enneh, for hosting us on their land. I wonder, how many more reports do we have to read to figure out that Canada's greatest natural resource are Indigenous youth? And the greatest, one report, Centre for the Study of Living Standards, $36 billion would be added to Canada's GDP if we closed the education and labor market gap. Pretty big injection, serious change. Well, if we're going to do that, we do need profound change in Canada. We need change in the workplaces, at the boardroom tables, in your employee groups, in the unions, in our institutions, everywhere. We need systemic change. And I mean, I'm a lawyer by training. I'm a former chief and former ombudsman, so I could talk about all those things for far too long. I won't. I'm going to talk today about the area where it is vital for creating capacity and change, and that is education at all levels. I want to begin by applauding the First Nations Education Steering Committee, the Government of British Columbia, and the Government of Canada for today signing a tripartite agreement on education to continue the systemic change that has begun in this province. It is fitting that it's on the eve of the International Day honoring education in Canada. Well, the kind of education change that is needed is the change that will strengthen the identity of our young people. We don't lack self-esteem or confidence. It's validation that's lacking of our gifts and what we have to offer. I'm lucky enough to have been around a long time. I've known Derek for a long time, and Terry and others here. It's an exciting time, what's happening in Canada. After a stack of Supreme Court decisions, a few elections, and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the country is moving in the right direction to create a new chapter in Canada's history and their relationship with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. No matter which area you look at, and it can be overwhelming, housing, water, economic development, you name it, if there's going to be change there, education is key. And you've heard a little bit about what I'm doing these days, the head of an Indigenous charity called Indspire. We raise new money to support our students to achieve their potential. Because while we know change requires political will, that's good, concrete steps are even better, and serious and sustained investment is critical. From corporate Canada, from government, from individual Canadians, there's a role for everyone. I spent a lot of time advocating and raising new funds to support students because they're investments in Canada. Since 2004, I am proud to say we have raised and distributed more than $100 million through 35,000 bursaries for Indigenous students in this country. And last year, that included 764 students in British Columbia. Let me tell you some of the things you don't hear in Canada and on the front page and the third page of the news. Last year, our students were studying 649 in STEM, 601 educators, 452 business leaders, 391 nurses, 255 Indigenous language teachers, 200 doctors, and I could go on. This is the promise of the country. When our young people achieve that education, but not just any education, education as Indigenous people, we will change this country. I am so proud that in 2018, because I've got a great team, not because I'm so great, Indspire was one of the top 10 charities of impact in Canada as named by Charity Intelligence. And we are one of the top 25 charities the Financial Post says is worthy of an investment. Well, that's one part. Role models are also critical. Mentorship is key, and those are areas Indspire's working on as well. But there is much more to be done. We are only meeting 20% of the need of the students who come to us. So I'm very pleased to shamelessly promote today the fact that Indspire has a matching campaign. Because of the Government of Canada, if your company and your company and your company puts $25,000 on the table to support our students, we'll double it. If you put, that's 50. If you put 50, it's 100. If you put 100, it's 200. Guess what? we will meet the needs of these students. And our North Star is, within a generation, every Indigenous student will graduate. And you know what? That is achievable. It is absolutely achievable. I spend a lot of time busting myths, challenging stereotypes. People still think, oh, you know, those Indigenous people, they have everything paid for from cradle to grave, education, health, then they don't even pay any taxes. Not true. So I spent a lot of time challenging those things and advocating for change. I celebrate success. The Indspire Awards, it'll be on television soon. We've honored people like Ed John. These are names that are household names in BC. Stuart Phillip, Lorna Williams, this year Chief Ron Derrickson for Business and Commerce. These are key to show our young people what is possible and to show Canadians what we are doing right across the country. We also bring teachers together. Teachers need to talk with one another about how to relate to our students differently, and advocating for First Nations communities to receive more resources for education themselves. And universities and colleges need more resources. And we need Indigenous post-secondary institutions as well, because they know what it's like to create a welcoming environment for our students. We talk to students, and let me tell you what they've told us this recently. We asked them 3 years, okay, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report came in 2015. Murray Sinclair, it wasn't by accident that a main theme was education. He knew that was the way to change and reconciliation. And here's what the students said when we asked them, have things changed? They said, not much in terms of financial support, that's our biggest need. They also said, yes, things are moving, more curriculum is in the classroom, but guess what? Often the professors themselves are poorly trained. They cannot teach about Indigenous issues. So they're looking at our students. I see students nodding. And so over to you, Roberta, you take this module. We're on the Indigenous part. And then our students have something they call emotional labor, where they feel like they have to be the teacher, and that's not what they're there for. Or the teacher will launch off as though they know, and they don't. And then the emotional labor from our students having to stand up and defend or feel guilty because they were silenced. Lots of nodding here. They told us the least safe place for our students is in the classroom. Isn't that a terrible comment? We need to change that. More Indigenous professors with tenured jobs. More of our people need to be in the ranks of every institution in this country, and to get there, we will need education. We will need, that is the critical element if we're going to unlock potential for our communities, and such potential. Indigenous ways of knowing, conflict resolution. Who do you think dreamt up treaties making in the first place? Our people know how to do that. We are masters at conflict resolution. We are masters at traditional healing. We are very good at environmental stewardship. I could go on. But the point is, our ways of knowing are relevant, more than relevant, essential to Canada's well-being and the globe, I would say. So, I'm working hard at education. That will unlock the potential for Indigenous communities. That will, and I see students every day, I see their power, I see their passion, I see what they can do. They're just waiting to be part of shaping the future of this country, if given the right support and opportunity. My North Star, within a generation, every Indigenous student will graduate. And I look forward to working with all of you to make that happen. Remember my shameless commercial. Thank you for listening to me today.
great presentation, but remember we have Pigeonhole, so if you have questions that you want to, please post them on there. Next, we'll get up Jenny for her presentation.
I'm checking out the technology up here before I goof on the PowerPoint. Oh, here we go. It's great to be here. Thank you, everyone, for the warm welcome and the organizers. We always have a really warm welcome with the residents of PG when we come here and the Kleanza Tene, so thank you again for having us. It's great to be here. It's also a great privilege and honor to be a non-Indigenous woman speaking on this topic, and it's not lost on me, and I really appreciate that opportunity, so thank you for allowing me to be part of this discussion. Innovation is a bit of a funny word. It's not always appreciated, and I think we're talking about it today in a really positive way. But, you know, sometimes innovators are called outliers, or they're sometimes called disruptors, or minorities can be innovators, and you have to stick your neck out to be an innovator. You have to be vulnerable, and that does put you in a precarious position from time to time. I'm an archaeologist. I don't think that there's probably many people in here who haven't interacted in their industry with an archaeologist. Who interacts with archaeologists in their discipline in the natural resources? Quite a few, quite a few. Yeah. We're a small company, and we're a small profession. There's about 250 professional archaeologists in the province, yet because of archaeology intersecting all forms of resource development in BC, the work we do has a really significant impact on the economy. As well, as we're learning more and more in recent years, heritage and archaeology are crucial aspects of discussions surrounding title, rights, treaty, collaboration, and ultimately reconciliation. Which button should I press? Did I mention I'm an archaeologist? We study old things. We're a little analog. As I mentioned, we're a small company in a small field, but we work across the entire diversity of BC and the Yukon and the Northwest Territories resource industry. We believe innovation within our own field is important, and when we began the company with my co-owner Amanda Marshall there in the front row, we began and we wanted to set out to change how the industry was done. Archaeology has not inherited a good history. It's not one that we're necessarily proud of, and I think that's part of what we need to talk about. We set out to be different. We're wholly owned and managed by women, by people with families. We partner with competitors. We're proud to be collegial, always have been. We partner with other industries, and we're very proud to hold several MOUs with several First Nations throughout the province to help them meet their goals. We believe adaptability and diversity is also innovative and have set out to be more than shovel bums. We've brought specialists on staff who are answering the needs of the industry and of the communities we work with, and that includes having lithic specialists, people who specialize in culturally modified trees, ancestral remains, animal remains, things like that. We also see our role as responding to Indigenous or community-led innovation by creating services according to First Nations needs and requests. We call this doing the right thing, which shouldn't be innovative, but it was innovative when we started, and though it's lesser today, it still is innovative to do the right thing. We also see responding directly to the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission as doing the right thing and as an explicit responsibility of our practice, and hope that this principle is adopted throughout archaeology and our intersecting industries. We applied this approach in 3 ways: education, on-job training in the form of internships, and heritage capacity building. In order to be relevant as First Nations compel innovation of engagement, dialogues, and new ways of thinking and knowing and doing, we are guided by asking ourselves, what happens when Indigenous people are in power positions? That's been a scary question for our industry and the natural resource industry in past years, and I think we're getting to the point where we can say we all win when we share the power positions. I want to talk about one way in specific that First Nations are compelling us to be more innovative in our approach and how archaeology and heritage in BC is managed. I'd like to situate us here in northern BC. We're all where the yellow star is in Prince George. So if you travel west of here, you'll find yourself eventually in the vast territory of the Gitxsan people. If we zoom in again there, we look a little closer at their 33,000 square kilometer area. This is an area of hyper-development. In BC archaeology, as some of you may know, the consultation process under the Heritage Conservation Act involves a process of referrals. And referrals are sent to communities as a way of fulfilling the obligation to consult. Unfortunately, they're often sent to communities who don't have the capacity to respond to these referrals. And further, unfortunately, by not responding to those referrals, it's considered consent. I think we can agree that there's a problem with that. We've been working with the Gitxsan in this area, as I said, of hyper-development to help them meet these capacity needs. We wanted to take a different approach and ensure that the Gitxsan communities have power over their watersheds and their heritage through development and with development. We have been working with them to create their own heritage permitting program, which is a monetized system, so it's tying into their goal for a self-sustaining economic heritage model, which is very exciting. So if you're planning on working in Gitxsan territory, get your checkbook out. I think that's exciting. It's been done in other places in the province with really, really positive results. We're going to be aiding them in referrals. They don't have the capacity right now, and so we're helping and training on how to review these referrals and training as we go, and then our hope and our plan is that we can step away from that. We're also helping them in their specific education goals. In this case, the community is very concerned about wildfire in their watersheds, and so, and also the sites that would be damaged in those really diverse and unique areas. And so we're working with them to look at how does archaeology and wildfire intersect, and how can we do training to do with that. We're also aiding in the development and delivery of the provincially certified risk course for archaeological field technicians. So that means then that Gitxsan folks can go out and do their own archaeological inventories in their own communities according to their own heritage values, and they don't need us, which is exciting. This is an example of the permitting system that they'll be using, so it'll look familiar to folks in time. In closing, I'll just say that instead of industry considering how to unlock Indigenous potential, I would prefer to see and make a challenge and see the opportunity to unlock BC's natural resource industry's potential instead, by choosing to positively respond to the inspiring innovations happening from the bottom up within Indigenous communities. If we took the time, we could learn a lot from them. Thank you.
Thank you, and I can confirm that it is a challenge for a lot of communities, especially when I was at McLeod. I did work in the land referral office, and we would get binders of referrals, right? 54 binders, 3 inches thick, and having to go through it 3 people at a time, so thank you for that awareness. JP, we'll get you up here next.
Bonjour. It's great to be here in the Kleanza territory. Kevin and Dan, thank you so much for inviting me. Really appreciate the opportunity to address this amazing crowd. Again, I am sometimes technically challenged. There we go. I want to start off with this idea, and you've heard it a number of times throughout today. When we talk about economic reconciliation, we talk about what it actually looks like, and what it really does look like in our minds at CCAB, and I think everybody, and especially if you're an Indigenous person, is when our communities are no longer managing the poverty we have been managing for 150 plus years, but we actually start managing wealth. Well, that begs the question, and in order to manage wealth, we need to generate wealth. The way we generate wealth is by leveraging our assets. And Roberta talked about our youth, so we really need to leverage our people, we need to leverage our land, and we need to leverage our innovation. And that's what's going to get us to that place where we are in a healthier state and becoming stronger communities, making stronger decisions which have stronger outcomes, not only for our people, but for all BCITs as well as all Canadians. So just a little bit about CCAB. I think I've met a lot of people here today, and there are a lot of extraordinary leaders. I can't tell you how, and I've got to know the people up here for a while now, and I am so grateful for this position that I have with CCAB. We're over 35 years old. I've been at the helm for about 6.5, having a business background, being a recovering entrepreneur myself, having the opportunity to run an entrepreneurial organization is really quite something. And I have such gratitude because I have the opportunity to travel around this country from coast to coast and up north as well, to meet business leaders from all stripes, all sectors, Indigenous and non. And I can tell you, I've never been more hopeful than I have, and I used to work in the Cranbrook Forest District in the early 90s as a forestry tech, and I'm more hopeful than ever that we're on a stronger trajectory as a result of the good work of many people in this room, but also our governments and many of our Indigenous and industry leaders. But at the end of the day, our organization is here to support that business growth, that mutual business growth between the Indigenous and non-Indigenous business communities. But we're not going to get there until we start to recognize that we are reconciling our differences. But I'm not only talking about reconciling our differences as Indigenous people in government and industry, but I'm also talking about reconciling the differences amongst our own nations and even within our own communities. And I was at a media announcement today with Chief Crystal Smith from the Haisla, and she said it so beautifully. She was talking about how important the LNG project was to her communities and the 20 communities that have signed on. And she said, we are having challenges as well with other nations, and what we need is the opportunity to work within our nations to figure this out, to reconcile our differences, to have these relationships without so much influence from the outsiders. That's kind of the way she put it, and I thought, that's absolutely right. Our communities are still trying to figure this out. We come from different socioeconomic backgrounds, we come from different territories, different leadership styles, and different takes on the way that we should be developing our resources. But we all have that respect for the land and our Mother Earth. And so this is an evolving conversation, and it's going to continue to evolve. But at the end of the day, when we're giving the birth to have this conversation as nations, the outcomes are going to be stronger. And when we do get to that table, this is what happens when you empower an Indigenous economy. So in 2016, our people contributed about $32 billion to Canada's economy, about $12 billion of that coming from Indigenous businesses. And this might seem like an incredible number, and it is, considering we've been on the peripheral of society for a very long time. But this is only 1.5% of the total contribution, total GDP here in Canada. So we've got about that 3.5% gap. Roberta talked about this education and workforce gap. I want to talk a little bit about, as you can tell from the title of my presentation today, that I want to talk about procurement in the business lens. Is Carol Ann in the audience today, Carol Ann Hilton? So I know she's kicking around. She talks about this $100 billion economy, and I'm going to talk about some of those numbers shortly. So our Aboriginal entrepreneurs are hungry, and this is what they've been telling us over the last 4 or 5 years. They're saying, JP, you and your team need to advocate more for our entrepreneurs. We need to get more activity because we can come up with the best widgets, the best service, but if we can't get in front of the marketplace, we're not going to succeed. And we said, we absolutely agree. And the wonderful thing is that we did this research with one of our partners, Sodexo, a couple years ago, and we did this survey with Canadians, and Canadians are saying the same thing. They recognize the importance of a thriving Indigenous economy. They recognize that having strong Indigenous entrepreneurs in the landscape is a strong pathway to reconciliation. So the question is, or maybe the call to action is, that this is your mandate. I think from a corporate perspective, if I was sitting in the chair of many of the corporations in this room, this is your renewed mandate. Remember, we're Canada's first entrepreneurs. We know business. We're just trying to find our way in a modern context, that original entrepreneurial spirit that's in each and every one of us Indigenous people. And here's something fascinating. So these companies, and I'm incredibly excited that these companies are just amongst 3 in one region of Canada, spend $1 billion a year on Indigenous entrepreneurs. And let me make the case here. Because of their commitment to Indigenous entrepreneurs, this is the average salary for a Fort McKay First Nation member, $73,000 plus. So think about the socioeconomic impact and the indicators in that community. I mean, you compare that to the average Canadian, around 39, the average Albertan, to put it in geographic perspective, around 50. We are good at business. We are good at employing our own people. We are good at succeeding when given the opportunity. But sadly, this is not a universal effort. We are working with the federal government, but sadly, as I mentioned, they're spending 0.3% of their $20 billion, which is equating to around $63 million. So if they actually targeted 5%, which is about approximate our population here in Canada, that would equate to about $1 billion. What starts to excite me more is the spending power of municipal and provincial territorial governments of $224 billion. If you take 5% of that, that's $11.2 billion more added to the Indigenous economy. And in 2017, the private sector contribution or spend was about $476 billion, or about, if we targeted 5%, that would equate to over $22 billion. So think about the impact that has on Indigenous economies. Everybody in this room, we are so fortunate that we have a wallet. We're so fortunate we have a credit card, a debit card, or cash in our wallet, and we have the power to choose where we spend our money. And so my call, and I'm actually more excited to tell you that the call that Mark Little, he's the chief executive officer of Suncor, and he's my co-chair for our procurement champions work, along with these other companies that are growing. We're saying stand with us and direct your resources and your opportunities to build relationships with our people through business by directing your procurement, your supply chain opportunities to the Indigenous community. And I find it quite fascinating. I could probably be up here blue in the face telling you how important Indigenous procurement is, how important that is. But it's funny when we get our champions that work with us, like Mark Little, to stand up here with me as well. And that's what we did when we went across government, and that's what we do on a regular basis. And Mark is absolutely committed to this. But there is a conscious bias against Indigenous people. There's an unconscious bias, of course, but I was alarmed to learn, and I heard it directly from organizations. I'm not going to say which ones. I say within our organizations, we just don't, a lot of my colleagues, they say, just don't think Indigenous people can do it. I'm like, what? There's 43,000 Indigenous businesses across this country that are contributing to the economy. This makes no sense. So we've got to break, as Roberta was talking about, busting these myths. And once we start to bust through those myths, we start to recognize that, man, we can really kick ass together. And we are doing it right across this country, and I couldn't be more proud of our entrepreneurs. And this, again, speaks volumes to Mark's commitment, and as well as the other 42 procurement champions. So my question, if you're not seeing your logo up on that previous slide, come and see me, because we want to help you get in front of that growing Indigenous economy. And I've got 2 other quick little slides, but this is the other thing I just wanted to touch upon. We'll probably get in this conversation, but this is a huge deal. And it was a result of somebody like Eric Newell 35 years ago, who went out into this, and he recognized that the Indigenous entrepreneurs was the future of his company, because they were the ones that were going to be contributing to the bottom line of their company by providing awesome goods and services to his company. 35 years later, we've got Suncor now, but they went to the market and raised over $500 million to be a 49% equity stakeholder in the East Tank Farm project with Suncor. We're talking about Trans Mountain. We're talking about all sorts of projects in this country that are going to be stronger because of the result of Indigenous participation as equity, as real partners. So my only other story that I want to share, if you haven't read Jim Prentice's book, The Triple Crown, yet, please take a read. It's an energy map, I think, for Canada. And the third crown of his book talks about his experience. I think he was probably one of the only ministers of Indian Affairs who wanted to work with our people. Because he recognized that when you get out and you start to walk around the Indigenous community, it's a place of strength. And I'll share you one quick little story before I sit down. My grandfather was a logger, my dad was a logger, I was in logging, and I did forestry school. And in forestry school, we're sitting on the road there, and our teacher was saying, okay, we're grading trees, a 1, 2, or 3. 1s means good, lots of lumber, high value. 2, some lumber, some pulp. 3s are the pulp. And we're sitting on the road, and we're yelling out 1s, 2s, 1s, 2s. And our prof went, none of you are right. And we're like, well, what do you mean? Clearly it's a 1 or 2. So, well, did any of you get up to walk around that tree, to really understand that tree? So my challenge to everybody in this room, if you have not walked around the Aboriginal tree, if you've not been in community, go in and walk around. You'll find it's a place of strength. Thank you.
Great presentation and talk about equity ownership. And I know that's been a topic for Trans Mountain with a number of First Nations talking about maybe ownership. So I think going forward, it's going to be a continued conversation. And in addition to that, just the amount of people that can be working for these companies. Most of our communities are within areas, especially in forestry, where if we have people living in the communities and get hired, there's a lot of sustainability there. So next I'll invite up Kory, and she'll have her presentation.
I'm not that tall either, and I forgive Roberta for walking out on my talk, but just kidding. She has to get the 425 plane. So Gila Kasla, my name is Kory Wilson. I'm Kwakwakiwak from Northern Vancouver Island, and I'd like to thank the Kleanza for allowing us to be on their territory, and of course all of the First Nations people across this country that have shared the lands with all of us, upon which all of us have made our living, our homes, our places of fun, our joys, our Christmas vacations, and summer holidays as well. So yes, technology. I know BCIT technology, and here I am. How does it work? Just kidding. So BCIT, of course, is an institution. We're very unique in British Columbia, as we're the only provincial polytechnic institution. We have a mandate to serve the entire province. We have an incredible depth and breadth of courses, from news anchor reporting, if that is your dream, to forestry management. Was it somebody's dream that clapped over there? Good job. To business, to every trade that you can possibly think of, to stream remediation, to engineering, to huge coding and the technology type streams. So we are very good breadth and depth of courses. We have 50,000 students across all 5 of our campuses, and we have so we have the 5 bricks and mortar campuses, but we also deliver programs not only in British Columbia but in many other places around the world as well. We pride ourselves on creating job-ready graduates, that 96% of our students go into the market. Sometimes I kind of joke, this certainly isn't on our marketing brochure, but in many ways we're BC's finishing school for people who attend post-secondary institutions and get a undergraduate degree, and they come to us and get a certificate or further training that allows them to go on and connect and attach directly to the job market and to the career of their choice. I've been at BCIT for a couple of years. And in fact, my first assignment or task when I joined BCIT was the Monday that I started. The following Tuesday was to come up here with our president, Kathy Kinloch, and attend this event. And I'm very pleased and happy to say that I've been here ever since. And I don't think Kevin is sick of me yet. I think he's very excited that I'm here, right, Kevin? So thank you for that. BCIT is one very important thing with BCIT is we are now in our 25th year of having services, intentional services, and programming for Indigenous learners. So in our 25th year, 2019, we're also in the process of completing our strategic plan that will serve us in the next 3 years. It'll, in the next couple of months, you'll be able to see that. In addition to that, and what makes it very significant, is one of our 9 objectives and main initiatives is to support Indigenous learners, to see Indigenous knowledge in ways infused across the curriculum, across programming, across our relationships, and across how we think and what we do and how we deliver what we do at BCIT to not only our students on our campuses, but around the province as well. We've seen today, we've heard today from all of the speakers that, and just even now, that education is absolutely vital. There's no question that education is the strongest tool, is the greatest weapon that can be used to overcome any obstacle possible. It's the one knowledge, it's the one thing that each of us have that can never be taken away from us, no matter what. And it's a process of lifelong learning. So knowledge and education is absolutely vital. And clearly today, from every speaker that I've seen, it's a complex world. It is a very challenging world that we're living in. It's changing in ways faster than we can imagine. I was quite surprised by the statistic of 2%, in the last 2 years, we've mined and produced more data than we ever have in human history the previous, so I guess 2017, 2016 prior. So that's an incredible amount of information. We're seeing advances in technology. We're seeing challenges politically and socially worldwide. We're seeing global issues, political challenges that we have as well. And we're seeing positive things. We're seeing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We're seeing the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. We're seeing all kinds of initiatives, the calls to action. We're seeing, as JP said, industry is responding to Indigenous people. Indigenous people are becoming educated at a rate that we never have before. Yes, we're still behind that of non-Indigenous Canadians, but we are achieving those milestones, and there is not an industry that we don't have a degree in. I mean, there may only be one, but we'll work to have more. But we are across all spectrums of Canadian society and looking to take our rightful place in Canadian society, not at the expense of non-Indigenous Canadians, but in partnership with non-Indigenous Canadians. Even though it is a complex world and we have complex issues going forward, the solutions do not have to be complex. They just have to take time, take relationship building, and take working together in a way that perhaps we haven't done before. This is a slide just to talk about the photo there. It's something that I always use and keep in my mind, because this is what I think I do. I think this is what a lot of us, as even non-Indigenous people, do. We all want our children to succeed. We all want our children to do better than we did. These are my grandnieces. Oh, they always make me, because they're so cute. They're now 8 years old, but my family has a history of residential school attendance, and how do you go from that to this? So there's the 8-year-olds in our family that are loving and living and feel free to be who they want to be. And that's what we all want, not only for ourselves, but for our children. And more importantly, we want to take that 8-year-old, well, they were 5 years old in that picture, but take that 5-year-old happiness and joy and be able to transition that to Indigenous teenagers, to 20-year-olds, to as Indigenous people become parents and enter the workforce. That's the complex part of it all, is how do we do that? So the way to do that is pathways. We see, Roberta, absolutely there's gaps in workforce and in education. We see the projects that Jenny's working on with the idea that I really applaud you for that, working in a way that's very different, that is bringing the knowledge to the community, bringing the knowledge to Indigenous people and empowering them to you're going to leave the knowledge behind and train and leave that expertise, rather than what was traditional. We go into community, solve the problem, and leave. Don't empower, don't mentor, don't support people. So creating pathways and sustaining those pathways is absolutely vital. And I know as industry, you're often challenged, or as a non-Indigenous person, how do I do this? Yes, we do have the challenge, as JP said, that some people have not only unconscious bias, but conscious bias against Indigenous people. They don't understand why this matters. I just want to make a mine, or I just want to build my house without having to worry about the remains that are underneath the property that I purchased that I didn't know until I started to dig up for my pool. There are those challenges, absolutely, but we are seeing a shift in our country of people becoming aware that we are stronger together. The question is, how do we do this? Again, it's the pathways. There's many, many programs out there that are doing wonderful things, job training programs. Many of you in here that I know have done incredible work to incorporate not only Indigenous knowledge, hire a senior Indigenous person to advise you to build those relationships, sponsoring training programs for your specific industry to fill those gaps, contributing to scholarships, working with JP's organization as well to become compliant. There's all of those types of things going on. Just as the same in Indigenous communities, we are educating our people. There are work programs. There are, you can go to post-secondary if you've been a child in care with free tuition. There are all these wonderful things going on. The challenge is, and the challenge to all of us is in the room, is how do we close that pathway? How do we close that gap? And how many of you know the answer? Or how many of you are like, oh, she's right? Right? Some of you are nodding your head. How do we do it is the question, because the reality is if we do it, we will all win. One of the things, and from BCIT, one of the really important things is that we work together. We have to leverage the strengths that each and every one of us have, not only as an individual, not only as a member of a community and a family, but as a member of an organization and a company that is working for the betterment, not only of the company, but for the communities that you are involved in. And I know you need, in the traditional way of doing it, companies need employees. You'll come and you'll ask me or others that are in the post-secondary system, whatever bank it is, we want to have accountants. Okay, well, we have graduates, we'll give you those accountants, but we have to switch that. You can't just come to us at the end of the pathway. How can you support us and work together with us and leverage your strength by, so when a child goes into grade 8, they do not switch to taking Math 8 Essentials. Once they take Math 8 Essentials, most of you in this room likely don't have a job for them, because most of the trades and many of the programs require Math 8 and then of course further math after that. So how do we close that pathway? One of the things that we've been working really hard at BCIT, and Brian is actually in the room, my BCIT team is right there, is thinking outside the box. How do you partner? How can we as a post-secondary institution, because we can't do it alone either. We can't wait for students to come to our doors and leave the First Nations communities and come to us. And once they come, we educate them and then send them back out the back door. We have to help and support and be part of communities, and in that we need help with industry. So one of the highlights that we did and just completed, they just graduated just before Christmas, Brian? Just before Christmas, they graduated. It's a program of refrigeration mechanical foundation program. And it was a series, it was a partnership with BCIT, a partnership with the high school in Kitimat, a partnership with Kitimat Valley Institute of Technology, ITA, various other people that are involved in the high school in Kitimat, and it graduated students with a program. Now they're job ready to go when they finish grade 12. They have a potential, they've experienced a career. And what was unique about it as well is that everybody did their part, did what needed to get done to help and support those students. As BCIT, we're in Vancouver, most of our instructors are there, but there was a retired former apprentice or a Red Seal person that was willing to give back and to teach these students. And so he came to BCIT, had to help support them there, and then went back. And then some of the challenge for some of the kids that were from the Terrace area to get to Kitimat every day, he found a van and drove them back and forth every day to attend the program so that they were able to graduate. We need to have work-integrated learning. Indigenous people, how do you unlock that potential? We need to see ourselves as important to you and your companies and to your industries. We need to see ourselves not just as the tradespeople, not just as the engineers, not just as the archaeologists or those types of positions. You also need people to clean your offices. You also need HR people. You also need other sorts of IT person. Every I make use of our IT department quite often, actually. So think outside the box of the options for people in your company. JT mentioned mentoring as well. If you bring somebody into your company earlier, how do you partner? Have you ever thrown, if you have let's just pick a place, Burns Lake, if you have a mill there, or you have some kind of action or some kind of work project going on in Burns Lake, have you ever thrown a pizza party for the young kids in Burns Lake and got to know them? Have you ever brought them to your plant or your work site to tour them around? Because if kids can't see themselves reflected in the work that you do or in what you are doing, if they don't understand what it is that you're doing, they're going to believe the negative stuff. We all know the key to this is relationship building, but we must start earlier in the pathway. BCIT, we pride ourselves on work integrated learning where we partner with industry. So our students, even before they graduate, can come to you and work on a project that you guys decide to work on. They're contributing to your industry. You also, let's face it, get to test them out. You get to see if they are a good fit for your industry or not. It's a win-win both ways. But also they learn practical skills. How can we do that in Indigenous communities? How do we unlock that potential? Is by figuring out where the communities are around the work sites or the places that you and your industry works. How can you start mentoring those kids? You know, maybe at 16 years, well, I guess now they changed the laws. You can't really drive on your own until you're 18 now, as my youngest daughter is very upset about. But they can drive. Maybe you just train them to get their, not just class 5, but the levels that go up. Yes, maybe their ultimate goal is to be an engineer or to be somebody in another position in your company, but bring them in when they're young. Can they come and do a summer internship? Maybe you don't technically have a job for them, but just having them there, building that relationship, getting to know the communities. So thinking outside the box, doing programs that are creative, that are applied, that are integrated, where each of us do our part to contribute to that pathway. Because the way forward for us as Indigenous people, the way forward for us as British Columbians, the way forward for us as a nation is by having that relationship that's solid and respectful. We're not always going to agree, but we can certainly disagree agreeably, but we can work together, recognize the potential. As Roberta said, the largest untapped resource in this country is Indigenous people. 55% of our population is under the age of 25. We're the only increasing population in this country. So we can either continue. My prior life, I practiced criminal law. It is $50,000, well now it's more, I'm certain it's probably closer to $70,000 or $80,000 a year to incarcerate a person. It does not cost that money to educate an Indigenous person. So it's the reallocation of resources, it's thinking outside the box, it's being willing to commit to build a relationship in a way that perhaps you have not done as an industry or as a person. And together we will be stronger. And the reality is that industries that catch on to this and start doing this sooner rather than later are the ones that will still be here 10 to 15, 20 years from now. Because as Indigenous people, as JP said, if you don't walk around our tree, we will not let you even on the land of our tree. So, and that's not, I don't mean that in a threatening way, but there has to be an understanding. So the industries and the companies and the entrepreneurs that take that time to walk around the tree and to build those relationships are the ones that will succeed or do, significant, not that others won't, but I don't want to say they're not going to, but we have to work together because we're not going anywhere. We are raising, again, the fastest growing population and the fastest segment. The one positive statistics for Indigenous people is more Indigenous women are going to post-secondary education than any other group in this country. And you saw Roberta, I wouldn't mess with her, and there are countless other people in the queue behind her. So thank you very much.
Hello? Can you hear me? Oh, thank you. So thank you for your presentations. It's been amazing, and it's amazing how much can be done. And We have a number of questions, but I just wanted to ask the crowd, how many people live within a First Nations territory?
Everybody should.
How many of you been there?
Yay.
Well, I think that's getting better, and I think the point of that is getting to know each other and getting to know where the opportunities lies and having a conversation. But I just wanted to get into the questions. I have a few here of my own, but we have some on the monitor. So many Indigenous communities are remote and it is difficult to build capacity due to distance, lack of funding, and technology. Do you see a solution to capacity building within these communities?
Can I take that one?
Kory?
Absolutely, absolutely. There's no question with partnerships, certainly with us at BCIT, we've been able to reach remote and rural Indigenous communities, and not just Indigenous, but other communities as well with our programming. And the reality is technology is that we underutilize technology. And we have not only not the digital supercluster, but there are ways to deliver programming in community that are suitable for Indigenous people. It's a matter of coming to us, not just us, of course, there's other post-secondary institutions in this province, but what do you need first? What is the training that you need to meet the needs for your community? Then the question is just figuring out a way to deliver it. Either you deliver it all online, or they don't have internet, so you deliver it all on paper, or you deliver it in files that are attached to your phone, or you deliver it in modules, or you deliver it at our instructor comes up, or you come down. There's so many ways to overcome that, and certainly internet accessibility is one of the greatest challenges. But I always think if we can educate people in places around the world where there is no electricity and there is no computer, and those children can grow up and get full ride scholarships to MIT, there's absolutely no way we can't educate every single Indigenous person in their community in British Columbia if we work together and partner together.
Prior to the conference, I was able to talk with Jenny, and we were having some discussions, and she said that sometimes there was a fear of companies working with archaeological companies in partnership with First Nations. Can you maybe explain a bit of that?
Yeah, so when we started out in archaeology, there weren't First Nations corporate partnerships, not on the scale that we're seeing nowadays. And also, when we started to work in capacity building and training with regards to heritage, we got a lot of pushback from our own colleagues saying, you're training people who are going to take away your jobs, which, I mean, I don't even know where to begin on that one. But it was never, that cultural heritage was never ours to own in the first place. And I think that that's important. Right now, I think people are really trying to come to terms with the truth part of truth and reconciliation, and that's gets a bitter pill for some folks to swallow, and I think that in those uncomfortable conversations, that's where we can grow. I think those are important to have. Sure, they're not pleasant, but I think that's a bit more of the unpleasantness or uncomfortableness a lot of people and industry are having to deal with. But I'm a business owner. We have a for-profit corporation. I want our business to do well. I don't feel threatened in the least. I think it's part of our success. It certainly is a nicer environment to work in if you're not terrified of people coming to take your jobs. It's not something we worry about. And I'm not sure why other industries feel that way. The partnerships that I've seen, the corporate partnerships that I've seen, they are successful. They're really positive. They're positive for the communities. They're positive for the business owners. And it adds a new way of doing business, a new way of knowing. We're learning from Indigenous communities that is so positive and has so much potential for inward looking in the community and meeting those goals that I'm not exactly sure why folks are being threatened. I feel like the statistics, we don't have a lot of them yet because it's new, but I think that the statistics will show that an ethical business model is a good business model. I think that they will amount to the same thing.
Thanks.
Do you want to sit closer?
Yeah. I've also seen that a general trend of more First Nations be involved at the board level with companies, as well as in senior positions. JP, you sit on the board of Ontario Generation and Norton Resources. Why is it important to have someone like you directing these companies?
That's a great question. Actually, Roberta used to sit on Ontario Power Generation before I did, so they've had a good history. But speaking of the history, talk about an act of reconciliation. It used to be called Ontario Hydro. It split off Hydro 1, OPG, and the generation and transmission. Ontario Hydro was responsible for flooding my reserve and our burial grounds, and there was past grievance. It was a really ugly part of our history. And now I'm on the board of the company that flooded our reserve. So it's quite an interesting position to be in. But why a big part of why I'm there and why it's important to have Indigenous people at the highest level of companies is that we can direct companies to make sure that they don't do that again, and that they start to being more proactive in the way that they engage our communities. And the other thing, I think it sends the right message to the Indigenous communities that you're trying to work with, your communities of interest. What kind of statement do you think it's making if all of a sudden they see one of theirs at the front of the leading role of a company, directing a company? It means the companies are invested. They're not always going to get it right, but the companies are invested in making the right decisions by having the Indigenous leadership at the highest levels of the company. So I think it's just, I mean, how many companies in this room, if you live on a corporation or work for a corporation, have an Indigenous person on your board? Not good enough. Not good enough. You've got to do better. I'll just leave it there.
So we're running a little short on time. I have one more question, and then I'll ask you guys just to say a brief closing. So there's overwhelming evidence of programs that support youth in their development. How are we able to ramp those programs up faster?
I would like to see them required in industry. I'll speak from an archaeological perspective as well. There's a direct correlate between archaeological companies' financial success and the degree to which First Nations cultural heritage is destroyed. I mean, that's just what happens. We're related to resource development, and we're the last ones who often go in and see these sites before something happens. And with that in mind, if that's a reality of our business, and if we are essentially exploiting a heritage resource, we should be required to, provide some sort of compensation in the way of training, or call it a cultural offset, or whatever. I mean, that would be a discussion to have with the community that we're working in, depending on their particular needs. But I would like to see some requirements at the industry level, a top-down approach according to bottom-up needs.
So more time the question about how we get youth involved?
Well,
Yeah,
how are we supposed to ramp up the youth programs at work? A lot of times it's people or often finances. So
I'll talk about one really amazing organization, and they've got all sorts of partners. They're called Outland, and I've just seen it in Northern Ontario, Thunder Bay, my hometown. And they bring in Indigenous youth from all over the north, and they expose them to education, to drones, to planting, to mining. And these are, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old youth that their lives were going down a track where they're going to take their own lives to a part where they go, man, I've got so much to give the world. And so I think it should be a requirement that you take stock of the Indigenous communities and take stock of where the youth are, take stock of where the gaps are, and find ways to fill those through partnerships, through funding, through mentorship, because they really are our future.
Yeah, so I would say that in terms of the programming, the way to you got to maximize what we have. Again, there's all kinds of programming and services out there for Indigenous people in all the areas and all the age groups that we can think of. The challenge is the transition. So if the program only goes to 16, what happens when you turn 17? Where is that connection or that bridge that happens? Or in the program that JP's talking about, they bring them down to Thunder Bay, which, as we know, has a horrific history of treatment of Indigenous youth, particularly when they come to Thunder Bay. But how do you change that? And so you can have a program that is helping and supporting Indigenous students and young people, but what is the industry doing? So say, for example, they come to Vancouver, are they being able to go and see the headquarters of X company and go up up and down the elevator? There are kids in East Vancouver that have never been to downtown Vancouver, because what is there in downtown Vancouver that's accessible to a child that's from a family that is in poverty? They're not going to ever be able to go to the top floor of the fancy towers that we have in downtown Vancouver, but they could if you invited them. You'd have to give them pizza, however. You got to let them muck up the window. But what you do when you're there is you're building that relationship and you're connecting those programs. And not only that, usually too, when they're younger kids, they come with their parents. So you can try to engage in parents. And you know, a lot of the programs we've had for young youth, the parents are there, and then you have oh, have you ever thought about upgrading your skills? So there's a whole kind of commitment. It does take longer, and it does take a lot of work connecting those communities. But how do you maximize and leverage the resources that already exist? Obviously wishing for more resources, but making sure you maximize and everybody play a part.
We replicated the program in BC this year, so it was amazing success. We saw some of that yesterday, so 100% behind that. Last words for our audience on just unlocking the potential?
Well, maybe I just want to say one thing to correct the question about Roberta. Roberta was not advocating that it's whoever has the largest checkbook will get the...
I think that was me who said that,
You?
wasn't it?
No, Roberta was talking about open your checkbook to do her matching program for scholarship funds and bursaries. That's all she was talking about. My last word is just do it. If you don't know how to do it, ask. There are so many resources and so many people out there. There is no excuse to not be able to do it. It's not going to be easy, as JP said, in many cases, and you are going to make mistakes. But the worst thing you can do is do nothing. And it's 2019. Let's just do it.
I guess my last word would be around the unconscious conscious bias towards Indigenous entrepreneurs. CCAB's got the best data in the world on the Indigenous economy, and we're really proud of that. The cutting edge research that's coming out in the next month is that we can show that our Indigenous entrepreneurs across the country can meet over 30% of government demands for goods and services. 30%. So we can blow by that 5%.
Mm-hmm. Speaking again as a non-Indigenous person who's had the privilege to work with Indigenous communities, and to echo what Kory just said, it doesn't have to be an intimidating process. It doesn't have to be something where you have to give something up to work with an Indigenous community or to meet their values. It doesn't have to even be a compromise. We can think of it as a harmonization of values. People don't have to be giving things up, and I think that's a more positive way of looking at it. But I just think that with engaging in Indigenous communities and working within them, a simple please, thank you, may I goes an awful long way. And I think we forget that, and there's really no excuse to never not be polite, whether on a small or a large scale, and I think we've been missing that.
Thank you. So thank you for our panelists. A round of applause, please.